Hear the drums from the depths. Every black moon night, that sound haunted Nkosi, the child with golden scales born in the heart of a storm. Though only 12 years old, he already carried on his shoulders both the fear and the expectations of the entire village. Some knelt before him as a savior, while others regarded him as a curse yet to erupt. Aminata, the courageous mother, held her child in her arms with a heavy heart. How could she protect him when the shadow of Kwame still echoed from the abyss? And when Zaya emerged from the sea, her golden, glowing eyes shimmering, Aminata only whispered, "You must face yourself. Would you dare to miss this journey, where the fate of a single child determines the balance of two worlds?" The sound of the Atlantic waves crashing against the white sands echoed like a timeless symphony. Along that shoreline, where the Gullah Geechee community had lived for generations, people began to grow accustomed to the presence of a most unusual child. That child was named Nkosi, born amid a storm, in the arms of a resilient mother, and under the protection of the golden-scaled mermaid, Zaya. From the very first day, he bore a mark of difference. His dark, curly hair, his bronze-brown skin, gleaming as though kissed by the African sun, yet it was his eyes that set the whole village whispering. At dawn, they were as black as those of any other child, but when dusk fell, his eyes glimmered with radiant gold, as though the entire fiery evening sky was burning in their depths. Each time Nkosi stepped near the shore, the waves seemed to rejoice, rushing to caress his small feet before retreating in ripples, leaving behind a trail of pure white foam. At first, the villagers looked upon this phenomenon with curiosity mixed with delight. Children gathered around Nkosi, wide-eyed, as the waves seemed to dance with him. They whispered that he could speak to the sea, that each step he took was like music that the ocean itself obeyed. But as he grew, those whispers slowly turned into wariness. The elders recalled the old prophecy of a child with golden scales, and in their hearts rose a tide of fear. Some believed Nkosi was a blessing, but many muttered that he was an omen, a harbinger destined to bring upheaval between land and sea once again. Aminata, the steadfast mother, understood the double-edged gazes of the villagers, yet she never allowed her son to feel alone. Each night, she held Nkosi close and told him stories of ancestors who had survived storms, of spirits that had never abandoned their descendants. She believed that love could shield him from harsh prejudice. And in his sleep, Zaya appeared again, her golden eyes shimmering like moonlight on the sea, her voice singing lullabies that carried Nkosi into peaceful dreams. Zaya was not just a fleeting shadow. To Nkosi, she was an undeniable reality. When he was joyful, he heard her songs rise jubilantly beneath the waves. When he was sorrowful, her voice lowered into a soothing hymn, wrapping around his tender heart like invisible arms. He did not yet understand why she was always there, but deep within, Nkosi knew Zaya was the bond that tethered him to the ocean. Yet difference always brings distance. When Nkosi played, other children followed but held back. They laughed, but their laughter carried a trace of fear. The adults watched with complex eyes, part awe at his mysterious power, part unease that one day such power might spiral beyond control. Nkosi did not fully understand, but he could feel the isolation as though he belonged neither wholly to the land nor entirely to the sea. The older he grew, the stronger the stirring in his heart became. Whenever Zaya's voice rose from the deep, he would stand for hours at the shore, his gaze fixed on the horizon, listening to songs that no one else could hear. The melodies seemed at once a summons, a reminder, and a comfort. He did not know their meaning, yet his young heart beat to their rhythm, as if his destiny had already been etched into every wave. Each night, when the moon climbed high, Aminata found her son sitting silently by the window, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight as he listened to a sound she herself could not hear. Her heart trembled, for she knew Zaya was always there, but she feared that one day her child would be pulled too far, toward the ocean, where she could never reach him. Aminata had already lost too much. She could not bear to lose her only son. Still, she never forbade him. She only said, "Remember, you are a child of both the land and the sea. Do not let one side consume you." Nkosi listened, though he did not yet fully understand. To him, his difference was simply part of life. But to the villagers, it was a crack between faith and fear, a crack that might one day tear the community apart. That child, surrounded by his mother's love, guided by Zaya, and burdened by the villagers' conflicted stares, was the very center of a destiny that never slept. And with each passing day, the golden mark in his eyes shone brighter, making the prophecy no longer a distant shadow, but a storm drawing ever nearer. Would Nkosi discover his true identity, or would he be drowned by the prejudice and fear the world had placed upon his shoulders? Before we begin, my dear audience, prepare yourselves for the thrilling continuation, the journey of Nkosi, the golden-scaled child carrying upon himself both the hope and the curse of the sea. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where and when you're watching. It's always wonderful to see the world come together here. Nkosi's childhood years no longer passed in the innocent curiosity of other children, but gradually became stained with suspicion. By the time he turned 10, the whispers within the coastal Gulagichi village were no longer filled with wonder, but had become hidden daggers aimed at the child with golden scales. People said that each time Nkosi walked by the shore, the waves rose unusually high, and schools of fish gathered in shimmering clusters as if eager to abandon the water. Some swore that the sky grew darker whenever his shadow appeared, and so what began as a curiosity soon became an excuse for people to explain every misfortune that befell them. Mothers who had lost children in storms whispered that his very existence had provoked the wrath of the sea. When a house by the shore was swept away during a night of heavy rain, the blame fell squarely upon the child who had yet to understand the extent of his own power. They said he was the mark of prophecy, the one who brought misfortune upon the innocent. In their eyes, Nkosi was at once an ordinary boy and a ghost of destiny. Yet not everyone regarded him with fear. Some knelt when they saw the golden light in his eyes at sunset, believing it to be the sign of a savior, one who would restore balance between the land and the sea. But such faith was not strong enough to silence the howls of fear, and at times that very reverence became another burden upon Nkosi's shoulders. He was exalted as a symbol, even as he was condemned as a curse. Aminata silently witnessed it all. Her heart ached every time she heard the venomous whispers behind her son's back. She saw clearly the wary eyes when Nkosi passed by, the quiet hands pulling their children away from his reach. She knew that no matter how fiercely she shielded him, her boy would still have to face the destiny woven long before his first cry. And it pained her even more to see Nkosi, on those long afternoons, standing alone by the sea, his golden eyes gazing into the distance, as though asking the ocean for the reason behind his existence. Within the child, questions accumulated into torment. Why did the sea rejoice at his feet while people recoiled? Why did the same eyes look upon him with both admiration and hatred? He was not yet old enough to comprehend the complexity of the human heart, but he was old enough to feel the solitude closing in, and in the dark of night, when the sound of drums echoed from the depths, his heart pounded as though some unseen force were calling his name. Zaya remained present, like a flame keeping his heart from going out. Yet her songs were no longer enough to chase away the darkness. To the villagers, she was a distant legend. To Nkosi, she was a comfort but also a reminder that he did not fully belong to the world of humans. Each time he saw her golden eyes reflected in the waves, he recognized more clearly the truth. The road ahead would not be easy, and he could not escape the suspicion of the community. One day, a small storm swept through, not strong enough to destroy, but still enough to break a few rooftops and kill some livestock. When the waves receded, People whispered that the storm had risen just after Nkosi had walked by the shore. Rumors spread quickly, like wind fanning smoldering embers into flame. From that moment, the distance between him and the villagers deepened. Aminata held her son close, wishing to shield him, but she knew that no one could protect him forever. Difference could have been a blessing, but in the eyes of those who lived in fear, it easily became a curse. And Nkosi, though still so young, had already begun to learn how to bear the weight of those heavy, unrelenting gazes. That night, the sky was moonless, the darkness thick like a black silk veil covering the earth. The coastal village sank into silence, broken only by the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Nkosi lay in the small house with his mother, yet his sleep was never peaceful. In that moment of stillness, a deep, muffled sound rose from far away, echoing from the depths of the sea, heavy as the heartbeat of some invisible force. It was not the sound of waves, nor of wind, it was the sound of drums. Each reverberation startled Nkosi awake, his heart pounding in rhythm, as if an unseen thread tied his chest to the endless abyss beyond. At first, he thought it was only a dream, but night after night, the drums returned resonant and hypnotic, calling his name in the chilling silence. He would sit up, staring out the window at the vast black ocean stretching into nothingness. The surface seemed calm yet trembled faintly, as if moving in time with that mysterious rhythm. In the darkness, Nkosi's eyes glimmered gold, reflecting confusion and fear. He told his mother, but Aminata only turned away in silence, her hand trembling as it clutched at her garment. She knew well what that sound was, but lacked the courage to speak it aloud. In her heart, the memory of Kwame husband, king, tyrant, was still etched deep. She feared that if she spoke, she would pass on an unshakable burden to a child still too young. Nkosi saw her avoidance, and within him the questions grew ever more tangled. Finding no answer from his mother, Nkosi turned only to Zaya. In his dreams, she appeared, her golden eyes blazing like sunlight trapped beneath the sea. Her hair curled like midnight waves, her voice gentle yet steeped in endless sorrow. She no longer sang lullabies as before, but whispered warnings. The drums were no accident, they were the echo of Kwame, a ghost that had never truly vanished. Her words cut into Nkosi's heart like a cold blade. He could not understand how one who had sunk into the abyss could still exist. In the dream, Nkosi asked, his wide eyes lit with panic, "He's dead, isn't he?" But Zaya did not answer directly. She only touched his forehead lightly, her voice sinking low like the whisper of waves in his ear. Sometimes death is not an ending, but the beginning of a new cycle. Awakening, Nkosi sat dazed, the echo of drums still thundering in his ears. He remembered his mother's eyes, Zaya's silence, and felt fear coil tighter. He did not know what the drums wanted, but he could feel with certainty that they were calling him, urging him toward the darkness of the ocean. With every black moon, the sound returned relentless, unyielding. The villagers, too, began to whisper. They could not hear the drums, but they sensed strange changes. The tide rising unnaturally, winds stirring in the calm of night, strange fish appearing and vanishing as quickly. Some claimed it was a sign that Kwame was not dead, that his ghost was returning through the sun left behind. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the weight of suspicion upon Nkosi grew heavier still. Nkosi felt himself increasingly torn apart, between sea and land, between his mother's love and the village's rejection, between Zaya's gentle song and the cold drums from the abyss. His young heart was being pulled as though two opposing forces sought to claim him. He wanted to believe he was light, that he was hope, but in the moments when the drums resounded, he saw a shadow flicker across his own eyes, and it made him shudder. Aminata, in her silence, saw her son changing. Her fear was not that he resembled Kwame, but that he might become something greater than that ghost, a force no one yet understood. In the night, she prayed for him, but in her heart, she knew that destiny could not be erased. it could only be faced. And Zaya, each time she appeared in his dreams, her eyes grew sadder. She knew the spiral had begun, and that Nkosi could not escape. She longed to shield him, yet she also knew he would have to stand before the drums on his own, for only Nkosi himself could decide, would he follow the light or let the darkness drag him into the abyss? Beyond, the night sea still thundered with the resonant drums, like the heart of a beast unwilling to rest. And within Nkosi, one question grew louder. Were those drums only the echoes of the past, or the summons to a terrifying future? Every morning, when the sun poured golden rays across the sea, Aminata often sat quietly on the porch, her eyes following the figure of Nkosi playing near the sand. The boy ran barefoot, letting the waves caress him, his curly hair glistening in the sunlight. In her eyes, he was still her little son, born in the storm, yet nurtured with sacred motherly love. And yet, the more she watched him, the more an unspoken fear stirred within her heart, like a fire smoldering beneath ash, impossible to extinguish. She remembered vividly the nights when Nkosi startled awake, his golden eyes reflecting the black moon, his ears listening to a sound she herself could not hear. She knew it was no mere trick of a child's imagination. She believed the drums from the depths were real, the return of a ghost that had never slept, and that truth cut deep into her. How could she protect her son from a destiny written long before his birth? Within Aminata, Zaya was her greatest comfort. She trusted that the mermaid would always protect, as she had once done on the night of the storm. Yet she also knew that even Zaya could not walk the path Nkosi had to tread. This child could not forever hide in the embrace of the sea or of his mother. One day, he would stand before a choice, to hold on to the light or surrender to the darkness, and that, above all, was what made her heart tremble. Each passing day, Aminata taught her son simple lessons: how to share their meager fish with neighbors, how to yield when playing with friends, how to hold another child to comfort them when they cried. She whispered to him that true strength did not lie in making the sea rise or the waves roar, but in keeping his heart from closing. She reminded him again and again that love was the greatest weapon, something even death could not take away. But in her eyes lingered a hidden worry. Would these lessons be enough to drown out the invisible drums, the call that was pulling her son ever closer to the abyss? She had seen moments when Nkosi's anger flared unconsciously, and the sea seemed to answer. Once, the village children mocked him for his strange golden eyes. In that moment of fury, the sea suddenly swelled, waves churning white, swallowing seashells and toys scattered on the sand. The children screamed and ran, while Nkosi stood frozen, his fists clenched, his face pale with fear. Aminata rushed to him, wrapped him in her arms, and whispered comfort, but inside, terror resounded in her heart. His power was growing, and if left unchecked, it could devour him entirely. Aminata knew a cruel truth. Within Nkosi's veins still flowed part of Kwame's legacy. No matter how deeply she despised that man, she could not deny that his blood lived on in her son. Her greatest fear was not the ghost of Kwame rising from the sea, but the ghost within Nkosi's own heart, the force that could turn him into another tyrant if he allowed ambition to eclipse love. On long nights when Nkosi slept, Aminata sat by his bed and wept silently. She prayed to the ancestors, to the sea, to Zaya, that her son would never follow in his father's footsteps. That fear kept her awake, but she never let Nkosi see it. Before him, she always smiled gently, always stood firm, for she knew that if she faltered, her son would lose the only anchor he had on land. But deep inside, Aminata understood one thing. She could not hold Nkosi in her arms forever. A child born in the storm could never grow up as an ordinary boy. One day, he would have to face the drums and the shadow of his father. All she could do was plant seeds of compassion in his heart, and hope that when the true storm came, they would bloom in time to keep him standing. Outside, the waves still struck the shore in rhythm, but within Aminata, waves of worry never ceased to rise. She knew with certainty that Nikosi's future was a fragile bridge stretched between light and shadow. Dear audience, take a sip of water and continue listening. The story ahead holds even more surprises. Comment 1 if you find the story compelling, so we know you're still here with us. That night, the sky was without a single cloud, only a vast stillness enveloping the coastal village. Aminata had fallen asleep, but Nikosi tossed and turned, his mind weighed down by the echoing drums from the depths. Suddenly, he fell into a dream unlike any other, so vivid it no longer felt like a dream. In the vision, Nikosi saw the sea opening before him, the waves receding layer by layer to reveal a dark path leading down into the abyss. Without fear, he stepped forward, his bare feet touching the cold sand, while whispers echoed all around him like an invitation. The deeper he walked, the more the light faded, until only one strange gleam remained, the eyes of countless small souls. Hundreds, thousands of children appeared, surrounding him. Their bodies were hazy as smoke, but their eyes shone like pearls, clear and sorrowful. There were no words of blame, no cries, only gazes that pierced straight into his heart. In an instant, Nikosi understood. These were the spirits of children lost in the storms Kwame had unleashed, or slain in blind hunts to silence the prophecy. They did not exist to frighten him, they existed to remind him that life did not belong solely to himself. Nikosi trembled, yet could not turn away. Their eyes placed a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, to live for those who had been lost, and to protect what they never had the chance to hold. In that moment, he felt the weight of his destiny more than ever, far beyond what a 12-year-old boy could comprehend. Amid the circle of souls, a golden light flared from the abyss. From it, Zaya emerged, her wet, curling hair woven from the waves of the night, her golden eyes gleaming with both sorrow and pride. She approached and gently touched Nikosi's shoulder. Without words, he felt warmth spreading through him, like the embrace of a second mother. Then her voice rose, low and resonant like the song of the ocean. To keep the balance, you must learn to look straight into the darkness within yourself. Only when you face it can you choose the light, and that journey has only just begun. Nikosi fell silent. Those words locked themselves deep in his heart, etched even stronger than the dreams of the drums. He suddenly realized that the darkness Zaya spoke of was not an enemy outside, but something growing within his own heart: anger, loneliness, and the blood of Kwame still pulsing quietly through his veins. Suddenly, the sea shook. From afar, a drumbeat thundered again, louder than ever, making the children's spirits tremble. Some of them began to fade, as though pulled down into the abyss. Zaya held Nikosi tight, her eyes flashing with warning. She knew Kwame remained, never truly gone, and was now reaching to claim the boy as his own. The scene vanished in an instant. Nikosi awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Outside, the waves crashed harder against the shore, echoing what he had just witnessed. Aminata still slept, but Nikosi knew he could not share this dream with her, for it would only deepen her fear. From that night onward, he never looked at the sea the same way. The sea was no longer only the place that rejoiced beneath his feet, no longer only Zaya's gentle song. It was also a door opening to trials beyond imagination. Within him, a new weight pressed. Would he keep the light in his heart, or would the drums one day grow stronger than Zaya's voice? The ocean had sent its summons, and Nikosi knew that sooner or later, he would have to walk that path again, not in a dream, but in reality. The summer rain fell suddenly, like a heavy curtain draping over the coastal village. The earth grew damp, the air tense, and inside Nikosi, another storm was rising. He had grown older, his golden eyes shining ever brighter like an indelible mark of fate. Since the dream of the children's souls and Zaya's warning, Nkosi had begun to realize that the power within him was not merely a difference, but a doorway that could open to either light or darkness. At the same time, he became aware of a change. His emotions and the sea had become inseparably bound, so much so that every tremor in his heart could stir the waters. When he was joyful, the sea breeze was gentle. The waves lapped in soothing rhythm. But when anger gripped him, the ocean roared, its waves rising in turmoil like an agitated beast. At first, these were only small occurrences that the villagers dismissed as coincidence. But then came the day when the truth could no longer be hidden. That afternoon, the village children gathered by the shore. They played and shouted, but their laughter carried mocking words aimed at Nkosi. The sneers cut into him, reminding him he was different. One child stepped closer, called him an omen, his eyes sharp with challenge. In that instant, the long-suppressed anger within Nkosi erupted. His heart thundered, and at the same moment, the sea shuddered. The waves began to rise. From afar, white foam swelled, and then the water surged toward the shore like the ocean's heavy sigh. Within moments, part of the village was swallowed by water. Wooden walls shook. Small rooftops were torn away. Screams filled the air, children scattered, and adults stood horrified at the scene unfolding in a heartbeat. Every gaze turned upon Nkosi, fearful, accusatory, stripped of all compassion. Aminata rushed forward, her trembling arms wrapping tightly around her son. Her tears mingled with the rain, uncertain whether from grief or fear. She saw clearly. The child she had raised carried a power too great for her to control. In the villagers' eyes, Nkosi had become proof of the prophecy. Not the gentle boy she cherished, but the embodiment of danger. Amid the chaos, a song rose from the sea. Zaya's voice echoed gentle yet resolute, like vast hands soothing the fury of the ocean. The waves calmed, the water retreated, leaving behind wet sand and bewildered faces. In that moment, the mermaid's form appeared within the curtain of water, her golden eyes fixed on Nkosi. Without words, her gaze offered both comfort and warning. Nkosi stood frozen, his heart pounded wildly, terror gripping him as he realized the power within him was no longer beyond his control, it was his to bear. He saw himself not only as a victim of prejudice, but as the cause of the fear surrounding him. When he glanced down at the still puddles left on the sand, the reflection pierced his heart. It was not only his face, but mingled with it was another visage, eyes glowing red, fierce and familiar. They were the eyes of Kwame, the one who had sunk into the abyss, but now seemed to live again within him. The moment chilled Nkosi to the bone. He stepped back, denying it, but the image did not vanish. He asked himself, was he becoming Kwame's heir, destined by blood to walk the path of ambition and cruelty, or did he still have the chance to choose otherwise? The villagers stepped farther away, whispers rising again, this time sharper, filled with dread. They looked at him as though he were a living ghost, a harbinger of catastrophe. Aminata clutched her son tighter, her heart breaking, torn between love and despair. She knew from this moment forward, Nkosi's solitude would be deeper than ever before. The boy lowered his head, his heart heavy with regret and fear. The power within him, once the gift Zaya had guarded, had now become a burden. And in the mirror of water, that shadow-bearing Kwame's burning eyes still lingered, a reminder that his death had never been the end. If Kwame's gaze truly lived again within Nkosi, could he escape that shadow, or would he too walk the path of a ruthless king? My dear audience, stay with me for the next chapter, one that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It is always a joy to see the world gathered together here. That morning, the coastal village was unusually quiet. There were no children's voices calling to each other on the sand, no warm greetings exchanged among the adults. Every gaze that turned toward Nkosi carried fear, as though his mere presence might summon another storm. The night before, when the sea had risen and swallowed part of the village, even though Zaya had calmed the waters and Aminata had tried to protect him, an invisible barrier had already been raised. Nkosi knew he could not go on living this way. That night, he looked at his mother one last time. Aminata was asleep, her face etched with exhaustion. Her hand still clutched at her garment out of habit, as if to hold her son close. Nkosi's heart twisted with pain, but he knew he had to leave. He had to go to seek the answer to the drums, to the growing power within him, and to the shadow of Kwame that grew clearer with each reflection in the water. If he did not, he would never know whether he could escape his fate. He slipped away from the village before dawn, when the sky was still dim. His steps carried sorrow, but also the longing for freedom. Behind him, the waves struck the shore, both holding him back and sending him forth. On the misty road ahead, Nkosi heard Zaya's voice by his ear. She did not appear, but she was always there, near and far, like a lighthouse guiding his way. He passed through the ancient oak forests of the south, where weathered trunks covered in moss seemed to preserve the memories of his ancestors. Amidst the rustling leaves, Nkosi imagined he could hear the whispers of generations who had endured slavery, who had crossed oceans in chains, yet whose spirits had never bowed. With each step in the forest, he felt he carried not only his own burden, but also the sorrowful and proud legacy of an entire people. Crossing the Louisiana swamps where fog blanketed still waters, Nkosi heard another song's strange voices rising from the depths of the mire. They were the echoes of restless souls, those who had perished in their pursuit of freedom. Their shadows glimmered faintly upon the water, but their eyes shone when they looked at Nkosi. He felt grief, yet also a weight of trust, as if they were telling him, "Go on, do not let our sacrifice be in vain." Zaya appeared then, standing amidst the mist, her hair flowing with the wind. She said little, only watched Nkosi with eyes filled with pride and worry. To him, she was the reminder that his strength was not only to protect himself, but to preserve memory and justice for all the souls who had come before. At last, the journey brought him to the open sea. Standing on the cliffs, Nkosi gazed out at the vast waters, the ocean like a giant mirror reflecting all that he was, both light and shadow. The waves struck like war drums, sometimes gentle, sometimes ferocious. In that moment, he understood. His power was bound to collective history, not merely personal fate. Every drumbeat from the abyss was not only calling Nkosi, but echoing the blood-soaked past, demanding justice that had never been granted. Yet, uncertainty lingered. Nkosi knew he was walking a path with no return. He had to choose, continue running or face the darkness within. Zaya's voice brushed his ear, soft as a whisper. "You are not alone." But deep within, he knew the final choice could only come from himself. That night, as Nkosi sat on the cliffside staring at the endless black sea, he felt an emptiness growing within his chest, like the violent undercurrents churning at the ocean's floor. He had crossed forests and swamps, had listened to the whispers of ancestors and the unrested souls, yet the haunting never left him. The drums from the depths, heavy, hypnotic, beating in time with his heart. The more he tried to ignore them, the louder they grew, pulling him toward the abyss. And then, on one particular night, he was drawn into a strange dream. He saw himself sinking beneath the water, not in fear, but in an irresistible pull. The icy water wrapped around him, the light faded, leaving only pressing darkness. There, in the suffocating depths, a figure appeared, at first faint, then sharply defined. It was Kwame. No longer the body of a powerful king, he emerged as a phantom, his eyes burning crimson, his face carved deep with hatred and pride. The sound of drums resounded everywhere, and he was the one keeping their rhythm, each strike piercing straight into Nkosi's heart. Kwame called him son. His voice was heavy, laced with both scorn and authority. He pressed upon Nkosi that he could never escape the blood that had birthed him, that in every vein still flowed a part of Kwame, one that would never disappear. Kwame no longer needed a body, for his drums had become the strength that outlived death, bound to the sea, to the curse forged by his own ambition. Nkosi trembled, torn between fear and fury. Memories flooded back, the villagers' suspicious eyes, the times he had lost control of his powers, the image of Kwame in the reflection of water. All of it made him feel as though he was merging with the ghost before him. Kwame urged him to choose ambition, to embrace power over balance, for only power, Kwame said, could ensure survival in a world already poisoned with injustice and hatred. The drums pounded harder, Nkosi's head spinning. Before him appeared visions of immense might, the ocean thundering at his command, those who had scorned him bowing in fear, a radiant throne waiting for him. Part of his heart ached with desire, craving recognition, yearning to no longer be the boy shunned in silence. Yet another part quivered, terrified that if he yielded, he would cease to be Nkosi and instead become Kwame reborn. Just as he was about to be consumed, another melody rose soft yet steadfast. It was Zaya's voice. Her song pierced through the layers of waves, through the deafening drums, wrapping Nkosi once more in familiar warmth. Her voice reminded him of her golden, gentle gaze, reminding him that strength had meaning only when used to protect, not to destroy. In the suffocating darkness, her song was the golden thread pulling him back to himself. And then, another memory surged, the embrace of his mother, the fear, the worry, and yet the boundless love Aminata had always given him. She had taught him that love was the truest power, that true strength lay not in making others tremble, but in opening their hearts. In the moment he thought he had lost control, the image of his mother holding him amidst a sea of rejection flared within, cutting away at the darkness. Kwame roared in rage, the drums hammering like a storm. But this time, Nkosi no longer trembled as before. Though fear still lingered, he held tightly to Zaya's voice and the memory of his mother's love, two pillars anchoring him to the shore of light. The drums thundered still, but no longer held dominion over his heart. Kwame glared at him with burning red eyes, full of challenge, before his figure slowly dissolved back into shadow. Nkosi awoke with a start. His breath was ragged, sweat drenched his skin, but his heart was steadier than before. He understood now that Kwame had not vanished, that the drums would return, that the ghost would always seek to drag him down. But he also knew he had a choice, to cling to love and memory, to Zaya's reminder, so as not to become Kwame's shadow. Outside, the sea still crashed, its echoes like the heartbeat of a great beast. Within Nkosi's ear, the question lingered. Would the song and the love be strong enough to hold him in the light, or would the drums one day pull him once more into the abyss? That morning, the sea was calmer than usual. Its rippling waves washed clean as though after long nights of fury. Along the damp, mist-covered sandy path, Nkosi walked back toward the village that had buried his childhood beneath suspicious and fearful eyes. The village was still small, the gray wooden roofs unchanged, yet to Nkosi, everything looked different. His steps were slow, but his gaze was steady, carrying the maturity of one who had faced the terrifying darkness of the deep and refused to let it consume him. When the villagers saw him, their hands froze. Their wary eyes were the same as before. No one greeted him, no one smiled, only heavy silence surrounded him. Yet Nkosi no longer lowered his head. He looked at them directly, not with defiance, but with the calm gaze of someone who understood his place. He knew they could not yet forgive, nor could they trust, but he also knew he had not returned to seek acceptance. He had come back to find a bridge between sea and land, between shadow and light. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. That afternoon, a sudden downpour swept over the village. It seemed an ordinary rainstorm, but as water poured down from the mountain, a small flood surged with earth and rock, threatening the low houses along the riverbank. Panic erupted, children screamed, and the adults rushed to brace the homes with wood, but the torrent's force was beyond control. Amid the chaos, every pair of eyes instinctively turned to Nkosi, remembering how he had once made the sea rise. Only this time, their gaze held not only accusation, but also a fragile hope. Could he stop disaster instead of causing it? Nkosi stepped forward without hesitation. His heart pounded, but he did not let fear take hold. He closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and stretched his hands toward the flood. In his mind, Zaya's voice resonated, gently guiding him, reminding him that power only had meaning when rooted in love. At the same time, the memory of his mother's embrace holding him tight when the world had turned its back returned, filling him with strength. His heart calmed, and strangely, the raging water also slowed, as though bowing to his command. The flood split to either side, flowing toward the sea, leaving the village road safe. The villagers stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed with their own eyes that the boy who once inspired fear could now wield the same power to protect. There were no cheers, no praise, but in their eyes, the suspicion had softened, replaced by a glimmer of light. It was not yet full trust, but at least it was a beginning. Aminata rushed forward and held her son tightly. She felt the change in his eyes, no longer torn between shadow and light, but like a new star rising. Fear still lingered, but hope had begun to bloom. For her, that alone was enough to believe her son could be something other than Kwame's shadow. From afar, Zaya appeared amid the fading rain. She did not draw near, but only watched, her golden eyes reflecting both joy and worry. She knew Nkosi had just passed a trial, but she also knew his journey had only begun. Kwame's drums had not fallen silent, the darkness had not vanished, and the golden scales upon Nkosi remained an unremovable mark. She gazed quietly, her eyes filled with the pride of a guardian, but also with the sorrow of one who already foresaw the storms yet to come. Nkosi stood in the center of the village as the rain ceased and the sky brightened after the flood. In his golden eyes, the reflected light was both steady and fragile. He knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, where each step would be a battle between love and ambition, between hope and darkness. But at least on this day, he had chosen the light. The story closed in a moment of silence, the village saved, a mother smiling through tears, Zaya watching from afar, and Nkosi standing as a bridge between ocean and land. Yet, in the whisper of the sea breeze, a faint sound still lingered the drums from the abyss, reminding all that the darkness had not vanished, only waited for its chance to return. The sun slowly sank beyond the horizon, the sunset painting the sea crimson, where Nkosi stood in silence amid the village just saved from the flood. In his eyes shone both pride and unease, for he knew this was not yet victory, but only the beginning of a far longer journey. The ghost of Kwame still echoed in the drums from the depths, a reminder that the darkness had not vanished, only waited for its chance to return. Yet alongside it, Zaya's song and his mother's embrace had planted in his heart a seed of hope, fragile but enduring, strong enough to resist being swept away by fate. Nkosi's story was not only the legend of a child with golden scales, but also a mirror reflecting back to all of us, that within every human being lives both light and shadow. What decides our path is not blood or destiny, but the choices we make each day. And sometimes, a single act born of love is enough to kindle belief in a heart wearied by suspicion and fear. But would the light in Nkosi's eyes be strong enough to lead an entire people? Or would the drums from the abyss return, forcing him to face a trial even harsher than before? All right, my dear audience, if this story touched you, take a moment to hit like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you hope to see in part 3? Do you believe Nkosi will hold on to his light, or will he be forced to pay the price before the darkness? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It is always wonderful to see the whole world walking this journey together.